game, Michael J.
World Championships in the books. What is it, the 26th World Championships?
Yep, sort of. It's only the 26th because they don't count the first World Championships at Gen Con. It wasn't really a World Championships, it was just kind of a tournament. But the first ever Magic tournament at Gen Con, the weekend that Garfield unveiled his masterpiece, it was, first of all, you could just play with whatever cards you had, but there just weren't very many cards. So, like, the finals, it's like one deck is like Dark Rituals, Unholy Strength, Dragon Whelp, Juggernaut, Uthden Troll, Sedge Troll, Lightning Bolt, Paralyze. Sweet deck, right? The other deck was like Llanowar Elves, War Mammoth, Giant Spider, also Lightning Bolt. Those were simpler times.
War Mammoth.
Yes, get it out early. Get it ahead of schedule.
What is that, like a 3/3 for 4?
Yeah, 3/3 trample for 4.
Nice.
And yeah, they had access to both Wild Growth and Llanowar Elves to get it out ahead of schedule. Oh yeah, so we don't count that one.
Yeah,
but
interestingly,
26
both Wild Growth and Llanowar Elves would be like overpowered in Standard right now.
I mean, mostly, but some of the stuff going on in Standard right now is extremely powerful. Yeah. To begin with, the champion, all-time great Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa with yet another Titanic finish in a star-studded top 4, taking it all home with Azorius Control. A deck near and dear to your heart, I know.
Oh, yeah, I think this is the best archetype in Standard. And I think, if you asked me at the beginning of the tournament what deck would have won, I would have picked Azorius Control. And of the 3 Azorius pilots, Strosky's pretty good, but Paulo's having arguably the best year of his career, and he's won 2 Pro Tours prior to this. So, Yeah, I've met the man. I know. So let's talk about Azorius Control. It's just such a well-positioned deck in Standard right now. It's
also a well-tuned list.
If you're a player of, like Paulo or Strosky, who is going to execute at a high percentile, maybe the highest percentile every turn for the entire game, these games that are designed to drag out for many, many turns, so you don't lose to Mana Screw and you do see a high percentage of the key cards in your deck, I mean, this is just the perfect strategy to try to take advantage of a Standard that's conducive to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just some the finishing touches of some of the little tweaks, the little tuning have helped push this one over the edge. So to start with, this is that Thirst for Meaning style of Azorius that uses enchantments because they're good, but then also gets extra mileage by Thirst for Meaning as a form of card advantage. As always, the primary ones here are Omen of the Sea as early sort of draw manipulation that you can you can cycle it later, but you can also pitch it to Thirst for Meaning later. And then the Birth of Meletus for just a little bit of card advantage, a little draw smoothing, a little of a lot of things. And then Banishing Light as sort of an inefficient answer to a lot of things. And then most importantly, but least important to pitch, is Elspeth Conquers Death. And one of the things I love about Paulo's build, which has been a recent trend, is the move towards a lot of Elspeth Conquers Death, partly because if you get flooded on it, you can pitch one early to your Thirst for Meaning and not feel bad about it.
So let's talk about all these details. You talked about this being kind of the enchantment build, and with Thirst for Meaning being a centerpiece card of this deck. I'd actually say that the thing that I like about Paulo's deck versus some other decks, other builds of Azorius Control, is actually the presence of Archon of Sun's Grace as one of the 2 creatures in the deck. So,
and +2 in the sideboard.
Yeah, so Archon of Sun's Grace is 2 WW for a 3/4 flying Archon. It's got lifelink, and Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. What does that matter? This is an Archon, not a Pegasus. Oh, wait, there's more. It has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. So I actually haven't played Archon of Sun's Grace in my own Azorius decks yet. I've been mostly a Dream Trawler guy. But I have to say, the more I think about this card, the more I think it might just be better than Dream Trawler in almost every matchup, including the Mirror.
See, I think you do want to have one Dream Trawler to get it over with. But the thing that I like about this Archon of Sun's Grace is that it's not actually in a Dream Trawler slot so much as it's in the 4th Shatter the Sky slot. Instead of the 4th Shatter the Sky, there's an Archon of Sun's Grace that if you squint can kind of help you stabilize in a similar way, but is actually just a profound way to take over the game sometimes in like in terms of actually having a threat that can help you win on a different axis.
Now, the way that I'd look at it is this. I do think about this as being in the Dream Trawler slot, although obviously your position holds a lot of water, or in this case, maybe some wind. But the thing is, imagine you're playing against like Mono Red Beatdown, which is like one of the areas where tapping out for a lifelink threat, that has some pretty decent toughness, which both of these creatures do, is advantageous, right? So Archon of Sun's Grace is a 3/4. Dream Trawler on defense is only a 3/5, so it's barely bigger than Archon of Sun's Grace. But Archon of Sun's Grace is a full UU cheaper, which means that on average, you're going to get this at least 2 turns faster than Dream Trawler, given the same draw. And, I mean, you don't have to block if you don't want to, but you can block with value almost all the time with this card. But that's not even the reason why it's so good in that matchup. The reason it's so good in that matchup, and we'll get to these red decks in a little bit, is they're not playing any removal anymore. Like, a 4 toughness creature is so different than a 5 toughness creature in a universe where the high watermark on burn is Bonecrusher Giant Stomp or Shock. But if people are just playing like some Bonecrusher Giants and no Shocks, which is what a lot of the red decks are doing right now, like they're just not going to kill it. It's just going to hit the table, and it's going to be real tough for them to remove. And it's just in play 2 turns faster than Dream Trawler, and it's not going anywhere.
Well, and that's part of why I think it's just so much more comparable to Shatter the Sky. Dream Trawler is just sitting in your hand, not defending you. Archon of Sun's Grace, instead of the 4th Shatter the Sky, is a play you can put down on turn 4 to really turn the tide, change the tempo of how the game has been going. And I do think it looks so much better than Dream Trawler in that matchup, at the very least.
So the other reason why I think this innovation is so compelling, and the thing is like, I actually disagree with you on some of your other thoughts on Paulo's deck. That although there's clearly the case that.
What are my other thoughts?
So I about some of the tuning things, and I would contrast with Severan's deck.
Sure.
Is that in the mirror match, there are so many advantages to this card versus Dream Trawler. So one of the things that's like a sore thumb about this versus Dream Trawler is that Dream Trawler has portable hexproof. But here's the thing. There's almost no cards that can target either card in the mirror match, right? Like, not none, but not very many, right? And so, like, it's not like the mirror match is going to terror either of them. It's literally like both of them just dodge Glass Casket, right? Like, they're largely in that kind of...
Well, no, not really. If you just tap out for Archon of Sun's Grace, Elspeth Conquers Death.
Sure. It depends if you're first.
Banishing Light, Elspeth Conquers Death. Just getting bounced by Teferi. So it seems like night and day. I don't know.
I think like you certainly have a point, right? But the thing is, on the other hand, Dream Trawler can get Mystical disputed, and Archon of Sun's Grace can't. Like I think that's like a big difference.
I guess I'm not trying to make a position. It sounds like you are. Is your position that you like a different build better than Paulo's?
So I actually want to finish talking about Archon of Sun's Grace, and then I'll jump a little bit.
Because there's one more part of Paulo's deck that I think is important to talk about. But go ahead.
The other thing about this is, assuming you were able to resolve Archon of Sun's Grace or Dream Trawler, the thing is like it's usually not that difficult to resolve threats in the mirror match because there's so many Teferis and Elspeth Conquers Death, which get back to fairies, meaning that cards just tend to resolve in the mid game. is that you actually draw more cards with Dream Trawler. So Archon of Sun's with Archon of Sun's Grace than Dream Trawler, you would think Dream Trawler would draw more because it has the Ophidian angle, but it's also constricted by the potential of having Narset in play on the other side of the table. However, Archon of Sun's Grace, you just play your like Birth of Meletis or whatever else, Banishing Lights, and you're just basically drawing 2/2 threats that your opponent is going to have to deal with at some point. So I think that that's a really important innovation. So what were you thinking is
what's the contrast? I mean, every Azorius deck at the tournament used Dream Trawler, but they didn't all use Archon.
Yeah,
right?
I think that Archon of Sun's Grace is an important tool that Paulo brought, versus a lot of the decks I'd been looking at for, the past month or so were mostly like as many as 4 Dream Trawlers main deck. Severin played 4 Dream Trawlers main deck. I think that it's an important thing to think about, especially if you're going to play a lot of Omen of the Sea and Birth of Meletis, which almost everybody's doing.
So what's the part that you disagree with me on regarding the tuning?
So I actually prefer a deck more like Severin's, which is heavy on Narset. So Paulo only played 2 copies of Narset. Severin played 4 copies of Narset, and rather than the Thirst for Meaning build, because again, it's not difficult to resolve a Narset. And if you have a Narset in play, you do a lot of damage to the opponent's ability to draw cards with cards like Thirst for Meaning. And even like playing like a ton of Omen of the Sea, it messes the timing up on some of those cards. And Narset is just so dominating in the heads up. That's really just the thing. So if you're like,
so you like Severin's build better than Paulo's?
I do. I think Severin's build's incredibly. I don't know that I would think it's like perfect. Like there's probably things I would do a little bit different, but I think that it has many innovations that are and details that I think are fantastic.
You would play 4 Dream Trawlers.
No, I would not. I would play 2 Dream Trawlers, or I would play 1 Dream Trawler and 1 Archon like Paulo did. But I like other details of Severin's deck. This is beside the point. I'd also play 26 land, and neither of them played 26 land. But I would play 4 Elspeth Conquers Death for sure. I think it's the most important card at the top end of this deck. When we were talking about the Thirst for Meaning builds, way back weeks ago, I was just like, I think these decks need some punch at the top end. Elspeth Conquers Death does a lot of the punch that you want, including getting back dead Dream Trawlers or other creatures to finish the game. But I think like his sideboard is so aware and awesome. I think like I just really think
because of the emergency powers or the Spectral Sailor.
I think the Spectral Sailor is amazing. I think that's like exactly the card that if you're in the market for some kind of commence the end game, some kind of sideboard Chemist's Insight, Spectral Sailor is just such a better solution than those things. And I think the Emergency Powers is very cute. I would love to pull it off. I don't know if I'd actually play it, but it seems awesome to me. I also like the Wanderer.
Sure.
So, all right. You like Paulo's build much better, it sounds like.
I didn't say that. No, I think that Paulo's build is like a real well-tuned version of this deck. I think that when you're playing with no card draw and you're just playing with all like 16 tap-out threats, you're playing a different deck. Paulo's deck has more counterspells, more card draw, and plays more like a blue-white control deck, like actual control deck versus this tap out deck that plays like some sort of a Moloku Kaiga deck, but with Dream Trawlers and Elspeth Conquers Deaths instead.
So
they're just 2 different archetypes, I think.
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with you. Like these decks are probably falling in slightly different parts of the spectrum, despite sharing many cards. They have slightly different game plans, but I think. I just like Paulo's list better than the other decks that are like it from before. Okay, like I agree with that. I think
not everybody played Narset, and he played 2 Narsets. I like the Narset, and I think that having a mix, like I think being able to get off of Foreshadow the Sky is like a nice improvement for this deck. I think that I think you could make an argument to play 4 Elspeth even in this deck, but I think that 3 is more than some people were playing. And I think that the 1 Archon of Sun's Grace is an awesome addition. So I don't know. He didn't reinvent the wheel or anything. I think that as far as this deck goes, that it's a nice addition. That said, I could imagine playing a Spectral Sailor in the sideboard of Paulo's list.
So I think that I would agree with most of your statements. I don't think that the clay is dry on the blue-white archetype for the current format, and I agree. I think Paulo made some really good choices for the kind of blue-white deck that he chose to play. I think I'm more in the camp of liking the 4 Elspeth Conquers Death, heavy up on Narset version of blue-white than the Thirst for Meaning Enchantments version.
Sure, because I mean it's also just Thirst for Meaning. Because even Severin played the enchantments, right?
Yeah.
Like there's still 4 Omen of the Sea, 4 The Birth of Meletus, and 4 Elspeth Conquers Death. So just didn't play the Thirst for Meaning.
Or the I guess the Banishing Lights that kind of go with them.
Yeah, but they became the 4th Elspeth Conquers Death and the 4th The Birth of Meletus. So it's still the same critical mass of enchantments.
I was actually curious. Neither of these guys played a lot of Glass Caskets in their main deck, and instead played a lot of Dovin's Vetoes, or in Severin's case, 1 Mystical Dispute.
Well, who do you want the casket against?
I think the Casket is one of the best cards in Azorius right now. It's, first of all...
Who do you want it against? Do you want it against Jeskai Fires?
I think that it's not very good against Jeskai Fires, obviously. I think it is...
You want it against Temur Reclamation?
It's very good against Temur Reclamation.
So that's the matchup for it? Because it can...
It's super good against Mono Red. The thing is, it contains like the hyper... first of all, it's a pretty good play against any guy that they're like tapping 2 for example, a Runaway Steamkin, and it's great against their Devotion Demigod, or if they're like the Phoenix version, it's very, very effective against their hyper resilient 3 casting cost cards, as well as being very fine against their 2 casting cost cards. I think that card is a card I'd want to play, and I think it's...
Who plays the Phoenix?
It's just some people play it. It didn't happen to get played in this tournament. But
right, everybody here was just playing Red Devotion.
Yeah, I think a fair number of people are playing both the Phoenix and Annex. So, but they did a good job, I guess, of anticipating the tournament they were playing in. I was just surprised that they didn't play Glass Casket, which I think is pretty good. But it's certainly not wrong.
Well, you're talking about specifically just Severin, right? Like you wouldn't play Glass Casket in the Thirst for Meaning build.
No, I'd actually... Well, obviously, Banishing Light, like you said, is more appropriate to that build, even though it's not particularly efficient at any job. It's a pretty good Swiss Army knife. I'd actually consider playing Trapped in the Tower in that build, which has some additional value against, like, Rotting Regisaur, but that's obviously not an exciting card to play.
Dude, I love how laser focused you are on Mono Red all the time. That's the only context. I love it.
I'm not. I'm super focused on blue-white. Are you? All my work in this standard has been on blue-white.
Specifically against Mono Red.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I only play Mono Red on Arena because those are the rares I own. But I've played blue-white on paper.
So as far as these Mono Red decks go, what do you think of this departure from playing any burn? It's just there's the Bone Crusher Giant, obviously. But instead of burn, it's just all about Embercleave and there's some fueling with like light up the stage, and then there's some combat tricks, whether from the Rimrock Knight or Infuriate for some +3/+2 action. But really moving away from Embercleave is basically a combat trick also. But really moving away from any actual burn.
Yeah, so this is so interesting. There were 4 Mono Red decks in the field of 16, and all together, if you add together 4 Mono Red decks prior to the tournament, like, how many shocks do you think there'd be? Like, 16? No, there were 3. Not even
one. Yeah, Eli Loveman was the only one who didn't shove all the way. Just played with 3 shocks instead of some of these. Yeah, instead of some of these random. Also, I respect 3 shocks. To me, it's
that.
Yeah, I think it's wrong to play any, but at least you thought about it. You know,
Pazzo didn't even play Bone Crusher Giant in his main deck. That's crazy to me.
that is crazy to me.
Not
That
crazy
is,
wrong. I mean, maybe wrong. I
just can't believe that would be right.
that card is so good in so many places, but I mean, they were really laser focused on not
And only 2 in the sideboard.
on like not being bad against Jeskai and Blue White. But the thing is, I think that if you don't want to be bad against Jeskai and Blue White, Mono Red isn't even the best choice. But anyway, that's beside the point. This deck is phenomenal against Temur, obviously. But the other thing I'd say is the dynamics of this deck in context, like how it plays against Blue White and Jeskai specifically, change so much with these decisions, right? So not playing Shock, which none of them played Shock except for Loveman played a whopping 3, and playing 0 to 4 Bone Crusher Giant only, basically changes this into like a Stompy deck, right? It's a Stompy deck with some haste rather than what we would normally think of as a red aggro deck. It doesn't have any of the trappings of a red aggro deck. And in fact, when you're talking about Infuriate or Rimrock Knight's front end Boulder Rush, these are like giant growths. I mean,
That's actually a really smart observation. I think you're totally right. This is much more, like more than 50% DNA here, Stompy. You got giant growths, and whether it's Embercleave, Rimrock Knight's pump spell, or Infuriate. Instead of having any flash creatures or anything like that, you've got a little bit of haste. But you're even making much bigger monsters than you would normally see between Anax and Runaway Steamkin
Torbrand.
And Bone Crusher Giant and Torbrand. This is like a deck of heavy hitters for low power, like literally low mana costs, but high damage output. That's a really good way to look at it.
So I think these things about like how would you look at it from the other side of the table, like you're playing Azorius, and when you're playing against a deck that doesn't have any reach, a lot of this stuff just changes. For example, Shatter the Sky is just good against creatures in general, but in a deck like this, just killing a bunch of creatures prior to their being able to attack you with them isn't just card advantage. It isn't just holding up your life. It isn't just sweeping. It's also keeping Embercleave off the table, right? So their main way to bash somebody out of nowhere is to get the cleave, right? But they need bodies to, create the momentum for the cleave. So, just a well-placed Shatter the Sky changes things a lot.
Yeah, but this deck isn't completely devoid of reach, right? Like when you've got 4 Robber of the Rich and 4 Fervent Champion, plus you're playing stuff like whether it's Infuriate or even if you just have like some amount, like if you can get, obviously you can get Embercleave on the table, but like you've got haste. You're not completely devoid of reach, right?
Yeah, I think,
or you just mean of traditional like burn.
I think that ability to deal damage outside of combat is different than just having haste, only because the blue-white decks can have like, you guys have like a Layabout Pegasus. They can have like, they can just go like, do so let's say they have 8 mana, just like do a removal card and then tap out for a Pegasus. Or the other thing that's the biggest problem is the Chapter 2 on Birth of Meletis. Like the 0/4 wall token doesn't just contain most of the creatures in this deck by itself. It has a very, very special feature in that it's not white. Because it's not white, it fully contains an Unchained Berserker if there's no Torbrand in play. And that's like a big, big deal. Because like...
I agree. I think that's part of the reason why I don't think...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Yeah, like they heavily rely on Unchained Berserker to just like get damage in to win games after sideboarding. And like Birth of Meletis just totally... It takes so much wind out of their sails. And
could not agree more.
And like the other thing is, obviously it depends a little bit on build. So Paulo played like 1 Glass Casket into sideboard, but 4 Aether Gust. Like Aether Gust is so important here because again, it's a non-white way of interacting with Unchained Berserker. And so like, and also they had Cerulean Drake, which is like Raffle, lol, whatever whatever net speak you want to do. That card just utterly shuts down their entire deck because it's not only not white, it actually kills most of their guys in combat. And then if they
But that's part of why I think you don't need to be about the glass caskets in the main deck, is that when you can actually afford to have an Archon main deck and then sideboard 2 more Archons, 2 Cerulean Drakes, and 4 Aether Gusts. Like, if you got that kind of room, plus Ethan's got a glass casket in the sideboard, but if you got that kind of room, you don't necessarily need to have glass casket in the main deck, you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're giving up percentage in game 1, but you have a heck of a sideboard. But anyway, I don't even know that mono red is particularly favored in game 1. I think the blue white deck just has to survive until like turn 6 or something, and then they just make a play that is like, it just has an insane amount of momentum behind it. Like, try killing my Call It Dream Trawler. If you don't, it's just going to undo your first 5 turns of the game in 1 or 2 attacks.
So what did you think of the other Bone Crusher Giant deck, which is also the other Aether Gust deck and the other Dream Trawler deck? Marcio Carvalho reaching another finals in another final day. Jeskai Fires. God, like, does Marcio just have, like, even if you only look at the last 5 years, he's had just, like, to put it lightly, an unbelievable 5 years.
But
anyway, yeah, he's a very, very impressive showing. He's continued to just be at the top of his game and at the top of the game. And I think that this fine showing with Jeskai's Fire is another one in that space, but there's not really a ton crazy here. The biggest twists, I guess, playing 3 Kenrith the Return King isn't exactly standard, right?
Well,
shaving going all the way down to 2 Cavalier of Gales.
So Cavalier of Gales is a real interesting card. It has a huge potential liability, right? Like, if you're playing against Azorius Control and that's the card that you have to play after Fires of Invention, it's not always bueno. So I think, like, somebody else might be better, just because there's a potential liability against Narset. I think that that's a reason to maybe shave that card. Like, if you look at Gabriel Nassif's version, for example, he played 4 Bone Crusher Giant, 3 Brazen Borrower, 4 Cavalier of Flame, 4 Sphinx of Foresight, 3 Kenrith, and no Cavalier of Gales at all, right? So I think that the other interesting thing about Marcio's creature mix is the addition of Dream Trawler. One of the things that was interesting to me about this archetype being chosen to be played by, a whopping 25% of this field is that I was actually very surprised. It doesn't gain a whole lot from the new set versus some of the other decks. And I don't know. What did you think? It's kind of a dog to blue-white in game 1, which I thought was going to be the top deck coming in.
I mean, I agree. It didn't really gain a lot, but this is a little bit different of a tuning, right? Like, once you get away from Cavalier of Gales and you embrace a little bit more Dream Trawler, Kenrith also, like you mentioned, Narset. If they got a Narset on the table, the last thing you want to do is have Cavalier of Gales as your follow-up.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But if you've got Kenrith, you're in business, right? Like, on turn 5, you go Fires of Invention with 1 up, play Kenrith for free, give Kenrith haste, and then you just attack and kill Narset.
Sure. Kenrith is very serviceable in that situation, much better than Cavalier of Gales. Also, even if they have a working Narset and they're somehow able to defend it, Kenrith can draw extra cards like on off turn, and it won't bother them.
I also like going down to just 1 Shimmer of Possibility instead of 2. It's a small thing, but I think it's just really smart. Cutting a Shimmer of Possibility for a 27th land, I'm into that,
Yeah, more temple action here. What do you think about 3 Deafening Clarion, 2 Aether Gust in Marcio's main deck?
That's interesting because, normally you'd be all about Deafening Clarion, but there is only really one matchup where you want it, right?
But I think that, to me, that's the reason you play this deck. Like you play mono red because you want to just beat up Teamer, right? You play Jeskai because you have a huge matchup against mono red. Right? I don't think that this deck has a great context against some of the other decks in the field, but it potentially, depending on how you tune it, has a potentially dominating matchup with Mono Red just because of Deafening Clarion.
Well, so you don't like this against Teamer?
I think it really depends which Teamer list we're talking about.
So like take Autumn Burchettes, for instance. They were playing Brazen Borrower, Hydroid Crassus, Uro Titan, Nature's Wrath, obviously, and built around 4 Thassa's Invention and 3 Storm's Wrath as support for the 4 Expansion Explosion, 4 Wilderness Reclamation thing, which is kind of a common way to do it. The biggest twist here is the use of Brazen Borrower and Hydroid Crassus to support Uro. So this is in contrast to like Depraz playing just the Brazen Borrowers to support Uro, no Hydroid Crassus, and then only 1 Thassa's Intervention instead of 4. So that's like 5 less Brain Geysers in order to get 2 Chemister's Insight and then 3 counterspells. And I just think that the counterspells here are just such a little – they're not enough to have a high enough impact in the matchups where they're good. So like the matchups where they're good are the matchups where the play the fairies.
So I feel like the biggest –
So I don't know.
The biggest departure to talk about is actually Kavartik's version, which has none of the Red Wrath, and instead plays 4 Nissa Who Shakes the World. I think this is a profoundly different take on the Teamer deck, and
totally
and messes up like what the matchup expectations are prior to the tournament starting. Like the Red Wrath.
That's a great point. I didn't realize he also didn't have any main deck Scorching Dragonfires either.
Yeah, so
he actually meant it. He actually just played as a blue-green deck, like an actual just blue-green ramp deck that happened to splash Wilderness Reclamation.
Yes.
Not with Reclamation, sorry, Expansion Explosion.
So if you look at like the Red Wrath, it does 4, right? It does 4, and if you play against it in a certain way, like for example, you tick up Teferi or you don't tick down Narset. The Teamer decks that have that card in them are not very good at interacting with Planeswalkers, and given the fact that Teferi just basically shuts down a big part of their plan by itself, that's not very good. However, the thing that's even worse about it is if you look at the creature selection in the Jeskai deck, Cavalier of Flame 5 toughness, Cavalier of Gales 5 toughness, Dream Trawler 5 toughness, Kenrith 5 toughness. If they just draw any guys that aren't Sphinx of Foresight and Bone Crusher Giant, their solo game is faster than your solo game, right? So I do think that Jeskai Fire's like Plan A lines up very well against the Wrath version of Teamer's Plan A. However,
that's a great point.
If you're going to talk about Kavartik's version, which has Nissa, and then Hydroid Crassus, and can potentially mess you up with Brazen Borrower also, I think it's at least different, right? So the bad stuff can happen.
Well, it's also playing Omen of the Sea, having actual Omen of the Sea as even more draw smoothing. It's a subtle thing, but Omen of the Sea it's going to help you even more against the other blue decks compared to just having removal like Scorching Dragonfire or the Red Wrath.
Yeah.
Like, you're right. This is Kavartik's build kind of changes things completely. Like, he's obviously never beating Mono Red game 1, right? Or not likely anyway. But, like, this is, like, a legit way to take this archetype and really upturn the Jeskai matchup.
So, I mean, I lost a very legitimate match at a PTQ against Teamer with Nissa Who Shakes the World, and I was very confident in my Teamer matchup prior to Kavartik revealing this strategy this past weekend. If you want to upend a metagame that you think, like, blue-white is at the top, this is the deck to do it. The problem is, and this is what happened, Kavartik could easily have been heralded as the deck design genius of this tournament. He happened to just play against a bunch of mono red decks, and he has no shot against them in game 1. And his game doesn't get particularly good after sideboarding, right?
Right, it gets better, but it's hard
to get better.
But it's hard to get because you got to get up to 67%. Right, like it's hard. Not even you have to get to 70%.
Like,
you got to get to 70% just to be a 49-51 dog if you can't win game one.
so like, what are you doing? Bringing in gusts and scorching dragonfires, or bringing in like fair 1-for-1s that cost 2? Like, that's the best you can do. And I'm not denigrating that, right? Like, this deck has amazing metagame disruption in its game 1, but I don't think that he's getting anything meaningful back against mono red that they can't. That they're like, oh yeah, well, we also have sideboards, you know, like it's the thing. It's not like Paulo's sideboard cards against mono red where you're like, oh shoot, he basically cut off their plan A and made his own plan B. That's insane. You know, that's not happening here. So I think, like, to me, Jeskai Fires is a real interesting choice. I do think that if you want to beat up on Temur, there are versions of Temur that have no shot against this deck. But I would actually say that the more interesting build, rather than Marcio's, maybe would be like Nassif's. And the main reason is out of the sideboard. So
the robber?
Yeah. Marcio played Legion Warboss in his sideboard, which is kind of like people.
That's the traditional way. That's the way that you normally do it.
But Robber is so profound in this archetype. Like, Robber is potentially good in mono red, right? Like, it's annoying. But when you're playing an actual blue-white deck against a blue-white deck, you attack them with a Robber on turn 2, and you flip over it to Fairy or Narset, they're kind of in a lot of trouble. Because the Robber might just beat them. Because this is like a Thief of Sanity order card that they already might lose to the card advantage. But if you could just, like, all right, I'm going to play your Teferi now. I mean, like, oh my gosh, Patrick. Like, that's a real problem for a deck that needs to keep Fires of Invention off the battlefield.
See, for my dollar, I think Nassif's deck to me is the deck of the tournament. To me, this is just I have never liked the Jeskai Fires of Invention archetype, particularly until Nassif's build. This one is like, it's like he elegantly solves a bunch of my fundamental problems with the archetype and does a bunch of stuff that I hadn't even, like, for instance, I love getting Cavalier of Gales entirely.
It's
going
such a
to
cool
0
innovation, right?
I love that. I love to see it. I love to see that. And then having 28 land, he actually goes, we mentioned Marcio cutting 1 for a 27th land. Nassif goes even further and has 28 land. I love that. And 0 of the actual simmer, just all land, because why would you ever want to simmer to anything except land?
8 temples. But he actually has an option there because he has Omen of the Sea at the 2.
Yes, for even more ability to do nothing but hit all your drops. And when Omen of the Sea is sitting in play, it's awesome because you free roll the activation. Because you were, like, when you have Fires of Invention going, you're not tapping your mana anyway. And then I think 4 Robber of the Rich out of the sideboard is inspired.
That is the thing that makes me, like, this is a real deck. I looked at this and I was just like, I mean, it is a nightmare if you're blue-white and, you know, you win game 1 and you're like, all right, this is a good matchup for me, and you see a Robber on turn 2. It's already annoying when it's a mono-red deck. When it's this deck, you better be lucky.
And then that's not even the end. I mean, obviously that's the headliner, and I think it's awesome, and I think some number of Temur people should be sideboarding Robber of the Rich. But setting all that aside, if you look at his sideboard, 1 Giant Killer, that to me is the only one that's interesting in I'm not sure if it's actually right, given I'm not sold that it's even the best, like where do you want it, in the mirror? But it seems like it's a fine potential hedge. The part that I love, though, is the Pyrohelix. Two copies of Chandra's Pyrohelix instead of just using the Scorching Dragonfires or Aether that everybody uses. I think that having 1 Devout Decree and 2 Chandra's Pyrohelix against Mono Red is such a better way to try to fight them. Like, I love the deal 1 and deal 1, with the theory being that in the draws where the Pyrohelix isn't the better one, you're not even doing as bad.
I mean, Pyrohelix is sweet, right? Like you can take out like a couple of world champions, or you could take out like a world champion and an unenhanced runaway Steamkin. That's pretty good.
But then having access to one giant killer does give you the ability to like exploit these people with no shocks. Like when you're playing against when you play against Seth Manfield's deck, you can tap down Annex, right? Or you could tap down the Bone Crusher Giant. And remember that 2 damage ability is only a targeted spell, not targeted ability.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can actually just use it to kill Annex or Bone Crusher Giant and still get a little bit of value. Because at the end of the day, sometimes just literally playing it as a 1 mana play that can trade with a 1-drop, that's like fine. And it's not like it's even like a bad body, right? Like
it's a 1/2.
Exactly.
It beats the 1/1s.
So I think this is just this to me is evidence. Like you don't arrive at this mix of cards without being so dialed in, so in the zone. To me, this is the smoking gun. I mean, Nassif's been on a tear in the last year anyway, quietly just like looking like the Nassif of old. This deck and this performance, this obviously, things kind of broke an unfortunate way at the very end, but to me, this tournament and this preparation and this deck is the smoking gun that, like, we're dealing with real deal Nassif. This is like one of the top deck builders of all time, one of the top players of all time. To me, I don't know if it's just been all this talk about Paulo recently or what, but like, I think Nassif is like back to remind some people of who the hell he is and why the hell we keep him in the conversation with Kai and John,
Yeah,
and obviously Paulo now.
I would have loved to see Nassif win. But I think I just agree with you. I would have said prior to this conversation, the best deck building of the tournament were Severin and Kvartek and neither of them finished, very highly. But I think you're just right about Nassif. This isn't even a criticism. The only comment that I'd make is I would just love to see more copies of Elspeth Conquers Death. It seems really, really potent in this archetype. It mauls other people's big threats in the mirror match and gets yours back when they get killed. So I don't know. Maybe you're getting so much value out of Robber. Like, is Robber insane in the mirror match? Or you just attack somebody and steal their Friars of Invention? Like, I don't even know. It's probably
you gotta
insane.
Be careful. The only problem is that, like, if it gets bone crushed, it kind of sucks for you.
Yeah, but I mean, in a sideboarded game, like, don't you?
Well, you know that they have Robber of the Rich, so you're not.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it's not like regular tournaments. So their whole deck list. But I think if people are not playing in the modern day Pro Tour rules, I think that it's often the case that people will take out cards like Bone Crusher Giant and Deafening Clarion in the mirror or pseudo mirror in order to bring in more mystical disputes, Dovin's vetoes, disenchants for the mid game fights, and then just shields down to Robber. I think that's possible anyway. But you're right, getting it Bone Crusher is terrible.
I do want to note though, obviously this list reeks of the kind of touches Nassif puts on decks, but we would be remiss if we didn't also give props to Raph Levy, his testing partner and World's competitor, who also played this same list. Obviously, the two Frenchies prepared together beforehand, and both of them putting in their contributions. It would not surprise me in the slightest if Raph just was Robber of the Riching from his red deck and just jammed it against Nassif. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I could totally imagine this. I had an arena game yesterday. I was playing mono red, playing against blue white. I attacked. I stole his Teferi. I thought it was a sideboarded game. I thought I was so smart, and then he mystical disputed me. I was just like, did he not have enough cards to side out, or did he anticipate this happening? I can imagine that happening and testing it, then Levy just being like, wow, what if we just did this on purpose? You know, instead of like doing it by accident. This is so good when you do it by accident. If you're doing it on purpose, maybe it's unbeatable. And I mean, this is a terror. Robber of the Rich is an absolute terror for control decks. Wonderful innovation that I think makes this archetype, and regardless of which Frenchie made the deck, I think you're right.
Both. There's no question. Both playing
fantastic.
Together.
Yeah.
But to me, this is the deck of the tournament, and I think, Robert the Rich is a thing that we talked about in the past, and I'm just glad to see the prophecy come to fruition, and and it could not be in the hands of two nicer guys. There is one more deck here. It's such a sea of Temur Reclamation and Jeskai Fires and Azorius. There's all these different blue decks, right?
Yeah.
Doing battle against all these mono red decks. So there's 3 flavors of blue, 1 mono red. There's a whole thing, and then there's just Glogowski packing 1 copy of Jund Sacrifice, topping out with God Eternal Bantu alongside Corvold.
Worked for him last time.
You've got to respect somebody sticking to their guns. And here we even see the 4 Agonizing Remorse in the main as a concession to the realities of everyone else is playing blue besides the red decks.
Yeah, it is a big thing. He cut all the Casualties of War from the main deck. There's 1 pathetic Casualties of War in the sideboard, making room for...
Well, who do you want it against? Who could you even... Casualties of War has helped step on everybody who could... all those spots where Casualties of War would be good died off.
Yeah, you want it against dudes like yourself, or you want it against... You wanted it against the metagame from 6 months ago, right? Like it was fantabulous against other cat food decks or against Oko decks, etc. But like you're pointing out,
you can still play it against some of these invention decks, right?
I mean, you're going to get like a 2-for-1 a lot of the time, but
it's so hard to. Yeah, you're right. It is hard to do it. Like that's just not the haymaker out of your sideboard.
But what is the haymaker? The closest thing is Shifting Ceratops.
I just don't know why you would play this strategy. It just doesn't seem very good against any of the other decks. What's your good matchup? Red, I guess. Like you've got Massacre Girl, Bronzodon-ish. Right. It's like not even very much. And you can't it's not like having 4 Agonizing Remorse is how you improve the red matchup.
No, sir. Well, explain this to me. Why is Agonizing Remorse the preferable card over Duress?
Over Duress?
Yeah.
So that you can take Archons and Dream Trawlers? I don't know. So that you're playing against Fires of Invention? Like, the Fires of Invention deck has so many creatures, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you Duress them, you're going to miss a lot.
Okay.
Right? Like, their hand is just like Sphinx of Foresight, Cavalier of Flame, Kenrith. Right? Like, you're just going to miss.
Yeah, it's just a little non-intuitive, don't you think? Like, it costs twice as much mana, you take a little damage when you're doing it, and it seems like it's good against similar decks. To
me, I think it's the clue that this is not a good time to play the... Because if this is what you need...
This is what you need.
Then something else went wrong. And then also, it's not like it's not like the rest of the package is just so sick that you just need to shore up a weakness.
No, it's just a medium grinding deck.
It's a medium deck that I don't think actually has any good matchups among the decks that people played at Worlds.
Like, I feel like Temur is so much more powerful than this deck, and this deck barely interacts with Temur. Right? Like, yeah,
well, plus, I think the Temur matchup just fell through the floor when they got the deal 4, right? Like if you play against somebody who doesn't have any of the deal 4s, like obviously you're looking like a genius if you're playing against somebody like Vartex build, yeah. Right? But other than that, like if you get hit with the deal 4, suddenly the value of having Thrashing Brontodon and Massacre Girl and like it's like what are you even left with, right? Like the whole board just gets swept. Like I don't know. like even like Carvold, it's not like a guarantee that you'll have gotten counters on him yet.
Yeah. I mean, but even if you like, they can just borrow that guy. It's like not even a thing. He's so expensive compared to their stuff.
Oh, I know. I just think that it took that deal for the sweeper took what was a real weakness and turned it into a real strength. And that's part of the reason why this deck went from hero to zero. I do love Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger in the sideboard, though.
I don't know where that card's not good enough for the main, right? Like,
well, it is interesting that you would want it in the sideboard.
One?
Well, yeah, that's the interesting thing to me, because it's like, where do you draw the line? Like, what was it? Is it just that Kroxa's only good against blue-white? Is that the thing? Because I bet this card is not very good against Jeskai Fires.
No, but
I could believe that it's the wrong way to fight Temur.
I mean, on the other hand, if you can get the sufficient number of cards in your graveyard, which isn't that hard, I think, like a 6/6 for 4 that has sweet abilities is not the worst way to fight mono red, right? Like it
a little
holds the
slow.
ground.
Yeah, you got to squint pretty hard for this to look like Uro.
I mean, Uro moves you forward and gains life. This does not do that, right?
No.
This is like we're at the same speed and you sometimes make the opponent lose life, which is very different than moving forward and gaining life against mono red. I don't know.
I also just don't want to be the person who has to play Epic Downfall instead of Elspeth Conquers Death. I just like the Elspeth everything else that comes with the package.
Elspeth Conquers Death is so powerful.
Yeah. Who would have thought that when they reprinted The Eldest Reborn that it would be good again, you know?
It's, we were talking about it before, and I thought that Eldest Reborn was better. No, man. Elspeth Conquers Death's ability to target and exile.
That's the thing I was trying to tell you is that
permanence.
The amount that you get up front is so good. Yes, the other modes are weaker, but you're getting such a bargain up front. And, one in the hand, 2 birds in the other side of the pillow bush or whatever.
Was the Eldest Reborn ever in Standard at the same time as Teferi? Because one of the main play patterns is just casting Elspeth Conquers Death and then bouncing it. Which is like, they're like, oh no.
It's weird that that's legal.
That is insane, right?
Dude, yeah, but with the Eldest Reborn, the move was like, you're like, oh, the Eldest Reborn, get back to Fairy. I bet this is going to go well, like now you can just play the Eldest Reborn again with you play another Eldest Reborn and you can bounce it and then they're just hard locked.
I mean, there's just these, you have a ton of mana where you're just cast the Eldest Reborn, Elspeth Conquers Death, eat your Narset, bounce it with my Teferi, which now draws a card because I ate your Narset. Attack your other Planeswalker with my Dream Trawler, draw a card, and you've got the Elspeth Conquers Death in your hand, and it will resolve because there's a Teferi in play. It's such an insane sequence capability that you can do with that card. And I think that we just agree that when you have that level of haymakers, medium grinding decks might not be where you want to be in Standard.
Totally. Real quick, but just to touch without too deep of a dive, former Esper Stoneblade and Azuria former Stoneblade, like Stoneforge Mystic, Jace the Mind Sculptor, just Callblade extraordinaire player from another era, Edgar Flores, made his triumphant return packing Cawblade without the Caw, but with, Snapcaster Mage and Vendilion Click. But a Snapcaster Mage, so a Stoneforge Mystic, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Cryptic Command, Sword of Feast and Famine, Batterskull, Mana Leak, Path to Exile, Supreme Verdict. It's like it's 2012 or 2013 with his top 8 list from the Classic last week in the SCG Classic a week ago.
In Philly,
Yeah, in Philly. So, that's an interesting one to watch. Particularly just Stoneforge Mystic. I don't think there's been high stakes enough modern events for Stoneforge Mystic to get completely maximized yet. But I also respect 3 main deck Force of Negations, man.
Yeah.
That's just a concession to the realities.
Got to be fast. And the thing is, you're down a card and you use that card, but there's so many ways to get back a card.
Also, I think anybody who just shows up with 3 ops, I got to tip the cap.
Really?
Yep. It's like Shocks, man. There's no reason that everybody has to always play 4 ops. Same thing with Serum Visions or Ponder. There's all these cards that people will just think you have to either play 4 or 0. You don't. Sometimes it's like obviously the first opt you draw is so much better than the second one in a deck that on turn 2 desperately needs to play Stoneforge Mystic or Mana Leak or something, right? Like if you draw 2 ops, it can actually be kind of bad for you. It might be 3 turns before you ever have a chance to play it. And I think 3 is just such a classic number for something that you want to draw 1 of. Like you really want to draw 1, but you really don't want to draw 2.
I think I might buy that, except for the fact that I would want to maximize my likelihood of having the first opt, which helps me maximize my likelihood of having a turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic. Also, if I have too many ops, I can always pitch 1.
Maybe. I'm just saying that's the trap that everybody falls into that I really appreciate that Edgar dodged, because I think so often it's right to play 4 ops. It's just like very often it's right to play 4 Preordain or 4 Serum Vision or 4 Ponder.
Let's not talk about Preordain in this way. I don't know that it's not right to play 4 Preordain when Preordain is legal.
No, like in Vintage, there were plenty of times where the right number of Preordains was less than 4.
Yeah, like right now.
Yeah, okay. But the point is that playing 3 is a thing that people should really do more often for cards where you really want 1, but you don't want 2. Frequently, Opt is not one of those cards, but sometimes it is, and I just think that even if it's only right 1 time out of 8, I think people usually only do it 1 time out of 50.
What do you think about this mana base? 3 Colonnade, 4 Field of Ruin.
I mean, I think Snow-Covered Island and Snow-Covered Plains are better than not Snow-Covered.
Well, because he has 2 Prismatic Vista.
Right. What's the part that is what's the part that's weird to you?
I don't know. I think 3 Colonnade is kind of weird. 3 Hollowed Fountain is weird. I almost feel like I'd rather just have 2 more Prismatic Vista and play 1 Hollowed Fountain. I can imagine that. And I'm not sure if...
Wait. Why would you want 1 Hollowed Fountain? You can't fetch it or anything.
No, I can just fetch the other lands, but I have 4 Flooded Strands I can fetch the Hollowed Fountain with. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. But, you're still, at the end of the day, you're still playing a Cryptic Command deck, right? I mean, granted, he only has 1 Supreme Verdict, so it's not like he actually needs double white. I don't know. Maybe. But who cares? Why? Are you just saying to prevent 2 damage because the only matchup that exists is blue-white versus mono-red?
I mean, that's not the only matchup that exists. I mean, you're liable to lose real quick in Modern to combo decks sometimes. So
yeah, but you would want Hallowed Fountain against them instead of Prismatic Vista, right?
I didn't even notice this before you mentioned this tournament, but I see 2 mono-reds in the top 3, including the top finisher. So I assume you're right. 8th place blue-white, 1st place mono-red, as it should be.
Yeah, I mean, and first and third.
Yeah.
But definitely a very different style of mono-red than in standard.
I don't know how Mana screwed that ad nauseum player had to be to lose to mono-red. I would not want that matchup. So,
particularly with, you don't even have any Eidolons or anything.
This deck has I'm sure this deck has cards you can't lose the game. Yeah, it has 4 you can't lose the game, and 4 Phyrexian Unlife. He must have been horrendously mana screwed 2 out of the 3 games to not win this tournament. But, we won't talk about that part. Just focus on the return of Edgar Flores. Paulo Vitor Damadurosa wins with a different blue-white deck, and Mono Red won the Classic.
And Gabriel Nassif, like Gabriel Nassif and Raf Levy with the deck of the tournament. And honestly, from watching Nassif play this weekend too, I think I think a lot of people are going to be surprised where it's suddenly just like I'm definitely fantasy league drafting Nassif for April.
All right.
See you next week, dude.
Awesome. Bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis days. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault